the world, despite the apparent global consensus on the significant threat posed by cybercrime, almost half of the respondents considered it to represent a very or fairly low risk to their business. Nearly 40% of all global respondents believe that bribery and corruption are widespread in their country. For South Africa, the percentage is much higher at 78%, placing the country just below Nigeria at 88%, Kenya 87% in terms of the perception of the pervasiveness of bribery and corruption. Then 10% of South African respondents say they have been asked to pay a bribe in business situations. We're now joined by Sharon Van Rooyen, who is the Director of Fraud Investigation and Dispute Services at Ernst and Young. Well, good afternoon to you and welcome.
Thank you, Colin.
All right, tell us about this survey and how it was conducted.
This survey, EY brings out a survey on global fraud trends every 2 years. And this survey focuses this time around on basically there's a lot of international law enforcement going on. Both in the US, we see there's a lot of fines and indictments for directors in terms of bribery and corruption. We see the UK and we see Germany and France also doing their bit. So it's to test basically the market and to test business to see what are they doing in terms of making sure that their own house, their own company is in order, and how do they perceive fraud, bribery and corruption in terms of the countries that they operate in.
So what's making fraud and corruption to be so widespread? Because the question would be, people in senior government positions earn a lot of money, but why so much corruption? Even blue-collar crime is reported to be, skyrocketing in as far as the stats are concerned.
Well, in terms of this survey, what it looked at was bribery and corruption and obviously fraud. But I want to stress it's not just about public sector, but it's very much about private sector as well. Because there is a perception that it's just public, but private sector, especially in terms of the legislation and so forth, it focuses a lot on companies and what they should be doing. So the perception is, in terms of private sector, they say that 78% of respondents perceive that there's fraud and corruption occurring. But if you look and you ask them in their industry if it's occurring, it talks to about 20%. So there's clearly a perception gap between what they perceive is happening and what they perceive or believe is happening in their own territory. So that's quite interesting. You also mentioned about 10% of respondents saying that they actually have been requested for a bribe. What is of interest, if you see the global survey results, about 21% of CEOs are asked to pay a bribe. So it's a lot significantly higher on the C-suite levels.
Most of the time there would be underhand deals and pre-tender negotiations where people are saying, if you give me this much beforehand, then you are likely to get a tender and all that. And it's very hard to detect the meetings of these people, how they communicate and all that. So how then do you reduce high levels of corruption and bribery when actually this is happening outside offices, even private sectors that do business with government? Deals are negotiated at golf courses, they discussed at coffee meetings and all that, coffee shops rather.
Well, I think it's about making a step back and really ensuring as an organisation that you've got a comprehensive anti-bribery and corruption program in place. And that doesn't mean a tick box exercise. And we certainly see that a lot of the organisations that have been surveyed, they have got this in place. But you need to take it a little bit beyond just the compliance side. It needs to be entrenched in the ethical culture of the organisation that those type of things will not be tolerated. So there's a whole host of things that can be done to try and eliminate. We recognise that you're never going to totally eliminate it, but you will reduce it significantly. And part of this survey is not just about the doom and gloom and what people perceive about bribery and corruption, but it's how we show you how you can actually do things that may change the culture of the organisation for the better. So it's not all doom and gloom. There's a whole section devoted to what good looks like.
But then to detect bribery and corruption is one thing, but to get people prosecuted and deals reversed is the other.
That's certainly, but we're also seeing trends with international law enforcement, and I'm sure it's a matter of time before it happens all over the globe, where they're heavy hitters. You look at the US and the tactics that they're using to investigate bribery and corruption, traditionally tactics that they use for organized crime syndicates. So they're becoming quite aggressive in the mechanisms that they're utilizing to try and root this global problem out.
Does it start with lunch or a bottle of cool drink?
Well, it's interesting because it's a fine line between hospitality and obviously, as you say, influencing people. But what I want to say about South African results is the respondents surveyed on the increase. It's cash payments that they say would be considered. 10% of respondents said that. And in our previous survey, it was significantly less. And then also misstating financial performance has increased, which is a big concern. So it's not just about the free lunches and, you know, the hospitality and so forth. It's the more serious things that they may consider in an economic downturn, which is very worrying.
All right. Thank you very much. Quite shocking, isn't it?
Yes. Thank you, Colin.
All right. We're speaking to Sharon Van Rooyen, who is the Director of Fraud Investigation and Dispute Services at Ernst and Young. And now